Hello and welcome to this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited that you're able to join us. We hold these panel conversations every week with leaders in law enforcement, simply around the topic of resident engagement and how resident input impacts the delivery of police services in communities across the country. And particularly, it's going to be fun today because we have a deputy police chief in a university campus setting who's going to be able to also share kind of the relationship between the universities and the communities and how you pull all those pieces together. So thank you for joining us. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called Polco. We work with communities around performance, helping to track and monitor performance as well as build stronger engagement, just because we know that input is such an important part of understanding how you're doing as a community and as an organization. And these conversations are really designed simply to share perspectives so that all of you can benefit from what other communities are doing and are finding successful. We want you to take away a new perspective, a new idea, something that you might be able to use in your community or your organization. And so thank you for joining us. Here's going to be the format for the conversation today. I'll quickly introduce the panel and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And then I'll queue up the topic for the day with, and then lead into questions that we'll be asking each of the panelists. We'll wrap it up with any conversations that the panelists want to have with themselves or bring up other topics that weren't covered. And then we will wrap it up. Generally, these sessions take about an hour. And so I'm excited that we have this group of panelists with us today, and we're getting into the conversation. So let me go ahead and start doing the introductions. Our first panelist is David Drezek, who's the Deputy Chief of Police for Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. He's been there since 2018. He's responsible for all the day-to-day operations at the university, public safety and police services area, and he also serves as the department liaison for the contact with local police, federal law enforcement. Dave came into that role after spending 20 years with the North Providence Police Department as a deputy lieutenant. It's particularly great to have Dave with us today simply because he can provide that perspective of the comparisons between a university campus setting and a municipal setting. And he's got experiences on both sides. And so as you think about engagement, it's going to be very interesting to hear his perspective on that. Throughout his 27 years in law enforcement, he's been recognized for his consistent leadership, which has resulted in a high level of loyalty from the staff that he's worked with. Dave, thanks a lot for joining us, and I would love it if you could just add a little bit more color to your background.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the wonderful introduction. I'd like to also thank my other panelists on the committee. I'm proud of where I am currently. I work currently for the Kutztown University Public Safety Division. I'm completing my 27th year in law enforcement with my first 20 plus years, was in North Providence, Rhode Island, which was a community of about 40,000 residents and a staff of about 70 officers. I retired there, working both as commanders, as a lieutenant in patrol and detectives. And ironically, my favorite part of my career, and the chief might get a chuckle out of this, if I could go back, my 6.5 years in K-9, I'd give the deputy buzz, but in my birds. But it's been a wonderful ride. And I tell a lot of young officers, law enforcement's a journey. Right now, we are going through some bumps right here. But overall, 99.5% of the officers are good, hardworking people. And through leadership, through fellow chiefs and myself, we will build that trust back. And overall, you know, it's out there. And there's no doubt in my mind we will get back to a healthy position.
That's great. Thank you for that. Really appreciate you being here today. Let me introduce our second panelist. Kaitlyn Perez is a community affairs director for the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. She started there in 2014. Kaitlyn's community affair experiences include launching significant social media and public relations campaign, initiating strategic law enforcement and community projects, coordinating large events. I mean, Kaitlyn, you have a very broad level of responsibilities in the county, and really appreciate you being here to be able to share your ideas and your perspectives. Kaitlyn's got a bachelor's degree in communications with a minor in criminology from the University of South Florida, and she's a member of the National Information Officers Association and the Florida Law Enforcement Public Information Officers Association. One of the other neat things about Kaitlyn is she serves on the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club of Sarasota and DeSoto counties. Kaitlyn, thank you for being here, and I would really love it if you would add a little bit more to your background.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. As you mentioned, I've been with the Sheriff's Office since 2014. My role is unique in that I am a civilian spokesperson for the agency. I often kind of challenge the sheriff here and I tell him that I am the one who actually has the best job because I have the privilege of telling the stories of the phenomenal men and women who work here. To the deputy chief's point, the majority of our workforce is really, really stellar. And they're in public service for a reason. So our agency has about 1,000 members. We have a population of about 500,000, which grows as season and the holidays and summer comes around in beautiful Sarasota, Florida. But I love what I do. This agency is phenomenal. Our crime rate reduction is at about 54% over the last 12 years. So we're doing very well. We live in a safe community, and we're really fortunate to live in a community that supports and respects local law enforcement. So I couldn't ask for a better gig.
I tell you, it's really exciting to have you here, Kaitlyn, simply because of your background experiences and the breadth of your responsibilities. I think your commitment to getting information out and telling the story is such an important role. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to share. So thank you very much for being here.
Sure.
I'm happy to introduce Chief James Smith, who was named as the West Helena, Arkansas Chief of Police in 2017. Following a 20-year tenure with the Memphis Police Department. Chief Smith has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's of arts degree in justice administration. He's also a certified post instructor in undercover operations and crime scene investigations. Chief Smith is a graduate of the Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command and the Arkansas Leaders School of Leadership program. Chief Smith is committed to his profession and community through a really long list of professional organizations and fraternal organizations. And Chief, I just want to thank you for being here and would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton, and everyone on the panel. I'm Chief James Patrick Smith. I have the opportunity to come back to my hometown of Helena-West, Helena, Arkansas, a little small town, actually the only city in the state of Arkansas that's actually on the Mississippi River. We're known for our King Biscuit Blues Fest. We got all types of historical backgrounds. Civil War was fought here. Hernando de Soto came through here. Trail of Tears has been through this location. Being with my tenure with the Memphis Police Department, I've worked various divisions within the department. I was able to come back home to be the chief of police. We're a little small town. We have approximately about 30 officers, sworn officers for the Helena-West Helena Police Department, along with probably about 20 to 25 civilian employees. We are a very peculiar community, a very diverse community. Most of our community is made up of farmers, people in agriculture, and different individuals within our community. I'm just so happy to be able to be on this panel with everyone from various backgrounds, and I'm just looking forward for the conversation.
Thanks, Chief. Even as a small community, I did a little bit of looking at your community's website, and you are recognized as being a progressive community. And
correct.
So I appreciate that. And there's so many universal things that are true in law enforcement that the size of the jurisdiction doesn't really matter. As you start talking about telling your story and engaging people, there are just a lot of universal truths throughout law enforcement, and you're all confronting the challenges that are confronting
right.
law enforcement across the country. So thank you for spending a little bit of time today.
Okay.
Well, let's kick into the topic. The topic today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. I was a city manager for 32 years in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities area, and I have always thought that public safety is such an important responsibility that impacts every aspect of community lives. And it's not just public safety. It really ties directly into how successful you're going to be just in residential life, in economic development, in recreational, and those types of activities. everything is based on the role that public safety plays in a community. And so I have a great appreciation and respect for the work that all of you are doing, and the challenges that you are confronting on a daily basis. Everything is always ongoing. You're always having to adapt to new environments. They're all overlapping. And then you're challenged by this past year with all of the civil unrest and the pandemic and all of the political division that is so prevalent in the country today. It just really begs the question about how do you go about making sure that you've got a strong and authentic connection with the people who you're serving and the residents who have invested everything into the locations where they live. Because it's a really challenging responsibility, but it's a really critical responsibility on just making sure that you're serving the communities in a way that is professional, serving with equity in mind, all of those kinds of things that you're all very well familiar with. It's a very important responsibility, and my hat's off to you for the work that you're doing. We have a survey tool that is called the National Police Services Survey, and it's really designed to help communities get a good understanding where their residents' perspectives are around police services. And we did 2 national administrations of the survey, one in 2018, and then again in 2020 after the George Floyd murder. And what we were interested in trying to explore is what were the shifts in resident perceptions and sentiment on police services between those 2 years. And this chart shows where resident priorities have shifted between those 2 timeframes. And it's really interesting to look at the shift and the change in those factors that have been caused by all of the stuff that has happened over the last couple of years. But the one area or a couple of areas that have actually increased in the level of priority are those connections between residents and police departments to do more community neighborhood planning and a closer connection between residents and the police department on law enforcement, public safety related issues. It's a really striking, but maybe not so surprising shift in priority levels. It just kind of demonstrates that residents are interested in building those stronger relationships. And so how do you go about doing that in a successful way? I've always believed that the number of people that you arrest doesn't always relate to whether or not people feel safe in a community. And so having these kind of tools that help you kind of understand where resident values are and the shift of resident values, it's such an important thing for communities to stay on top of. And so this conversation that we're having today is really intended to try to find out how are you accomplishing the goals that that you have laid out for making those connections and helping to guide the work that you do. So let's kick into the questions. There's 3 questions that I'd like to pose to each one of you. The first one is, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of local police services? Second is, what strategies do you use for managing those expectations? Because I think that in a lot of cases, it becomes as important to know how to manage it. And then finally, what tools and methods do you use to help understand residents' expectations, priorities, and help you kind of understand your overall local performances? And let's jump into the first question, if you don't mind. And I'd like to start with you, Chief Drezek. Can you talk about what role the community should play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services at the university?
I think it's a very important role. You know, I had spoken to you earlier pre this interview. I can give a unique perspective to a university and a municipal setting to the fact that we are a college town. The borough of Kutztown has about 4,500 residents. When we're fully engaged with staff, faculty, could have a sporting event, we could have 10 or 14,000 right on our campus in our 300 acres. So the community involvement is very important. Community trust is the most important. Whether you're dealing with friendships, relationships, you lose trust, you lose everything. And it's very important to keep that. You know, I'm very proud of the citizens of our area in Berks County. I talked to you earlier. We have tremendous support with our leaders. The community put billboards up supporting us. When the unfortunate incident, which made every good cop sick to see what happened with the George Floyd, we also had the trickle down here. We had a demonstration with over 1,700 people in Kutztown. And you can compare that with the size of the community. So when 1,700 people are marching, it's a large amount. But what we did, we have a great working relationship with the Pennsylvania State Police. with Chief Craig Summers, and I work for the best chief, Chief John Dillon. We work together with the organizers. When you work with the stakeholders and you give people a seat at the table, it shows that you are vested as well. So incidents around the country, people were throwing things through windows, destroying property, shouting vulgarities. Well, this literally with the working together with the civic groups, the community leaders, our leaders in our own university setting, we had a peaceful protest of 1,700 people. It was a wonderful experience. It was peaceful, and the people were able to use their First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech. So I really believe it's paramount for building trust is working together. And like any relation, like we're doing now, talking to each other. You build that. I'm probably going to have contacts. I sent Chief Smith a LinkedIn request before this meeting. I intend to talk to him again. You build these relationships. I don't know. I might have a student from Arkansas or something. We don't know. But I love building relationships. And I think leaders should embrace that and should embrace policies. Here, we have an open door policy. We'll talk to civic leaders and university officials or students. So we find engaging staff, students, and the civic leaders, it's been a home run for us.
Chief, when you are, with all of your liaison work, can you talk about the importance or the value of having those connections as you start to think about addressing all of these challenges, particularly the combination of the university connections and the city connections, or even maybe more regional connections, but kind of the value of using those community partners for addressing the law enforcement needs of the area?
100%. We share resources. We have a current training in the next couple of weeks with another adjacent borough, Fleetwood, where Kutztown borough officers, university officers, and Fleetwood we'll all be on the same page with doing training inside for active shooter training. So if anybody stacks up, you have 3 officers from 3 different agencies, they know the same protocols. That's just working together with law enforcement. I can bring into civic leaders. Chief Dillon might get a call to talk to leaders about noise and students making a ruckus in the borough or minor things. But what are those issues? Those are quality of life issues that matter to that person. So and the chief, I'm sure, gets a lot of calls like that. They seem to be nuisance calls, but they're not. It's quality of life, and you want that person to feel valued, and you have to address that. And I tell my officers, it seems like the biggest move point. I say, just do the right thing. Always do the right thing, and you'll never be in trouble. And value the people you're talking to. When I came here from New England, I told them I expect you to respect all stakeholders, students, faculty, area residents, respect everyone. And it's been a wonderful success.
That's great. Thank you. Well stated. Kaitlyn, can you talk about the role the community should play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Sarasota County?
Absolutely. And I'll echo a lot of the deputy chief's thoughts there. I think it would be tone deaf for a law enforcement agency in 2021 not to be engaging with their community. Also, to the deputy chief's point, there's been an evolution in law enforcement. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were fighting crime, right? Dealing with the crack epidemic, dealing with a whole array of really law enforcement focused issues. We have evolved into solving quality of life issues and social issues. And so unless we're communicating with the residents we serve, we don't know what it is that they want out of their local law enforcement agency. One of the best kind of connections we have is with a group that's designated in one particular pocket of Sarasota County where we have kind of higher crime. This group comes out to the scene of any major incident, and they are the second group of people we call if something happens. God forbid we have a shooting that takes place, we've got a felony traffic stop that goes sideways. That deputy on scene calls his or her supervisor. And then the second person that they call is the contact through the SURE group. That's the acronym for the group. The SURE group is comprised of community members who live in that community. They come out to the crime scene as well, right? It's strategic, it's intentional. And we know that we can't get out there and just assume that we're doing what the community wants us to be doing. We have to listen, get that feedback, and it's a constant feedback loop, right? Making sure that we're being responsive when we're fulfilling the needs of the desires of our community. So again, I echo the deputy chief. We believe very much in community policing, which is much as it's kind of an antiquated term at this point. I think most police agencies around the country are probably practicing some form of community policing. But again, if they're not, they're stuck in the wrong decade.
Okay, well, the SURE group is really, it's intriguing. So it's a group that is actually located throughout the county, and but you can deploy them at essentially a neighborhood level, depending upon where an incident is actually happening. I'm kind of curious, what role do they play when they're on the scene, and how does that help you in the delivery of the sheriff's services?
Well, I'll tell you, the SURE group is comprised of different community stakeholders and leaders within that community. So you have individuals who are part of the faith-based community. You have teachers, and you have people who are invested in that community and have lived there for 20, 30 years. When they get on the scene, sometimes it's, it's overwhelming. People are excited. Some people don't feel comfortable talking to law enforcement, but may have information that they need to provide. Those members of the SURE group kind of liaison to ensure that if there's crime information, tips, et cetera, they kind of liaison and say, hey, no, listen, when it's generational. So some of these individuals have grown up through the criminal justice system and they're not comfortable talking to law enforcement. That's a challenge we will always be presented with, but the individuals in SURE act as that liaison to say, hey, these are the good guys, let's share this information and let's get better together. Matt, they are hugely helpful to us. Such a great partnership. We couldn't without them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that's very great. I mean, talk about a very effective way for building community with the people who reside in that community, especially when you're in a stressful kind of a condition like every incident generally is. Thank you. That's a great idea. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people that will enjoy hearing about that. Chief Smith, can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding the services that you have in Helena-West Helena?
Well, the first thing is you have to get back to the basics. Any veteran executive officer in leadership must know we got to go to old school policing. And that's more community oriented policing, building that bridge between the community and the police department to actually let them know that this is your police department. This is not the chief of police department, nor the mayor or the city manager. You have to make them more involved with everything that you do. And I'm talking about here back in 2020, Helena-West Helena, we created a racial equality task force. We knew after the George Floyd incident that we needed to get all stakeholders, people from different nationalities, religious, black backgrounds, and bring those individuals together to come with a common cause of how we're going to solve crime within our community. And one thing is being a chief of police or any executive leader in law enforcement, just being truthful, just letting people know that, hey, if you messed up, hey, I messed up. If there's anything that you get a little stuck on and you need more input from the community, just getting out that information and that trust. Here in Helena-West Helena, we have a small population of about 10,000 people. Everybody pretty much grew up together, know each other, and just getting that information out, just being able to make them feel that their police department is here for them, getting more officers in the school system. I think one of the major breakdowns is that Officer Friendly, who used to be in the school and everybody knew him and they could call him at any time, we kind of took that out of there because of the decrease in people getting hired with the department, recruiting, retention. Nobody wants to be the police anymore. We have to educate our officers, but at the same time, give them something back. 2018, what we did is looked at reaching out to other DOJ grants, the Walton Foundation grant, being that the Walmart is stationary here in Arkansas, reaching out to some of these stakeholders and saying, hey, you want a better qualified police officer? Hey, let's write a grant. Let's look at some grants for professional development. Because with the change in law enforcement, the changes that happened when President Obama was in office, the 21st century police model of having officers not being so much as warriors, but as guardians. And we got to get back into those communities. So that's one of the things that we did with our department, is to get back into the school system, participating more in the Boys and Girls Club, doing more things out there in the community to let them know we're just like you. We're human, we're fathers, we're brothers, we're sisters, we're wives. So we just want to let everybody know that, hey, when we take off this uniform, we have behind this uniform, there's a human being, regardless of their nationality, where they came from, their background. We all are a melting pot, like a rainbow, that has some significance for our community.
That's great. A great perspective. And I'm glad you brought up, sounds like you're getting back into the schools. That chart that I showed a couple of slides ago, the highest national priority there is school safety and security. So that connection between law enforcement and school environments is just such a critical thing. So I'm glad to hear that you're reconnecting with the schools in a maybe a more meaningful way. I am kind of intrigued though, as you start thinking about your racial task force, your racial equity task force, if you were to suggest one thing that worked really well for you in that task force that other local government leaders might be able to benefit from, is there anything that comes to mind?
One thing is they told the truth. They didn't try to sugarcoat anything. If they held myself, the mayor, and all the city council, the aldermans, they held us to a higher standard. The main thing is, one thing that we really paid more focus on is the use of force, duty to intervene. We body cams, anything of such. We went through our policies. We revised our policies. They were there to guide us, to advise us that some of this needs to be changed with the city attorney. So we made them a part of it. We made them part of their plan, even with the strategic plan that I put together when I first got here. I made them involved in it. And that was more of community enhancement projects that is what is needed. Going back to the faith-based organizations and sitting down with the pastors and the deacons and the ministers and just sitting there and talking with them and seeing what are the challenges that you hear on a spiritual level that we maybe can take over to the police department in a physical level. And we got to understand we under one God, and we have to serve our people, and we have to understand that we have officers that live in this community, and we just want to be able to have it thrive. So what do that plan look like? And that's an involvement from everybody within the community, even the young people that's in high school or junior high school. We get them involved. We have symposiums. We have different type of meetings and conferences where we bring these young youths, and you just be amazed about some of the things that they talk about, and how they just putting all this stuff together, and you're like, wow. And even on the flip side, putting them where I've had officers that get these children and bring them, and they spend a day with the police officer or someone in city government, because these are going to be our future leaders. And we have to instill in them that one day you're going to take this road and you're going to have to be able to achieve the goals that this community wants for you.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that great perspective.
Kaitlyn,
can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations in Sarasota County? Such a critical thing to be able to understand expectations, but then to be able to manage those expectations. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and again, I'll echo the chief there. We involve our community in our strategic planning process, right? So this is our document we just released a couple of weeks ago, and in the back of there you can see all the people in the community who contributed to it. We don't know what we don't know, so managing those expectations is important. One of the things we did on the heels of George Floyd, we knew that, again, although those issues weren't happening in Sarasota County, we knew that there was going to be a national conversation on police reform. So we looked at the 8 Can't Wait initiative. We looked at our duty to intervene policy, our lateral vascular neck restraint policy, and we came up with a campaign, and we called it How We Serve. And in this document right here, we released it about 12 days after George Floyd. And it highlights all of these things, all these elements within our agency. IAs are down 60%. It defined for our community the culture of our agency, right? So this was a pulse check, kind of our own report card, if you will, to say, hey, Sarasota County, we are not Minneapolis, we're not Atlanta, we're not Chicago, we're not having these same issues that other communities are. This is how we are serving you. how are we doing? So we kind of went through each element in a public forum through meetings and also on social media. And social media, again, in the 21st century, if law enforcement isn't using it, they're missing an opportunity. It's a dialogue, it's a feedback loop. We're not just pushing out content, but we're having conversations with people. So as individuals engage with us and say, this isn't right, or I had this experience and this deputy wasn't kind to me, I respond and I say, well, give me the case number, give me the date, give me the time. And more often than not, we've found the citizen just wants a phone call. More often than not, that citizen just wants to hear somebody on the other end of the line, discuss what their issue is, maybe vent a little bit. And so it's so simple. When we receive a concern from a citizen, we get on the phone, we call, we follow up. And more often than not, that can solve the problem.
The material that you shared, that's really very, very impressive. So congratulations on that. I am kind of intrigued on during this last year how you engaged your residents on your strategic planning process. Was it virtual? We're going to talk about that on the next question, but how successful was that effort in engaging the number of people that you wanted to engage with that planning effort? And any suggestions or advice that you would provide to others on how to make it even more successful?
Yeah, we did a blend this year. We had both a virtual option for citizens and an in-person option. And I think the best thing that we did is we made sure that we checked all the boxes. We had someone representing the faith community, the education community, the mental health community. We actually, I think, had a few people representing kind of substance abuse and mental health. So make sure you've got the stakeholders at the table. Make sure you've got people who are invested in this community, who people respect and admire. And ask them tough questions. Don't be afraid to get uncomfortable. That's what the strategic planning process is about. The Sheriff Hoffman got in the room and said, what are we doing? Are we doing it right? Are we messing up? You guys tell us. And again, knock on wood, we're so grateful to live in a good community that supports us. But there's been times when incidents have happened and hey, it kind of raises a flag and says, hey, we need to revisit this. We need to take a step back and be a little vulnerable and say, how can we make this better? So you have to be willing to listen to that feedback.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I really appreciate both you and Chief Smith bringing up the notion of that those serving the public are residents as well. And so showing some of those vulnerabilities and having the willingness to want to help work with folks to find those answers is just a very important message. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Chief Smith, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations?
Well, one thing that we do, Mr. Fulton, is that we try to put out a local assessment. We want to measure our success with the community. One thing I've noticed that you have to take this process one step at a time, just depending on what your community is. I've heard different individuals on the panel say, hey, we live in a great community, but you have to look at the history of your community. There was a lot of distrust in our community when I first got here, still is, but we're far more better than where we were probably 4 or 5 years ago. And just getting that trust and measuring that trust, getting these individuals who are stakeholders, who are individual lay people that's in the community, and just sitting down and sending out brochures, pamphlets, and say, hey, we need a quick response on this. Having some type of event where they can fill out a questionnaire and just talking with them, And a lot of small towns like our community, we have grassroots meetings at churches where they put the mayor, myself, city council members on the hot seat. And they just ask us different questions and they say, hey, this is not going on and why? But just like we all said, they just want to call. They just want someone to pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? And then just answering some of the questions. And because they don't know, they get off of this stigmatism that they have on the media and what people say and just a hearsay that's in the community. So one of the strategies that you have to look at is how do you get all these individuals together and promoting and getting that information out in a timely manner and getting that information back to you where you can actually have this assessment that you put out through the radio station, local newspapers, local media, whatever you can to get this information out to everybody and say, hey, this is the perception. Now, we know what we have identified the problem. Now, how can we solve it? Because a lot of times when they ask the question and you ask the question back to them, they come up with the answer.
Yeah.
And it'd be a legit answer, but they just want someone in government to say, hey, this is what's going on. So you just have to keep them informed. In small towns, I know Deputy Chief, he knows coming from a large department, going to a campus department, and myself coming from a large department and coming to a small community, it's a different beast, but to have the same problem. So just getting that information out, measuring your success, and each year have showing that we started with this here, and here we are today in 2021, and look at the growth that we have. So just getting the information out, getting positive feedback, negative feedback, talking about the issues, and I actually at the end coming to a resolution.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate, the way that you've kind of described it strikes me that police departments around the country are being confronted with the noise that's coming from social media or whatever. But so the challenge is, how do you get to the true story that actually reflects where your residents are? And so using the tools that you're talking about on being able to track how you're doing and having that authentic understanding of where your community sits is such an important thing. So thank you. That's a great perspective.
Yes, sir.
Deputy Chief Drezek, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations on the campus or in your other experiences that you've had?
For us here at KU and any police department nationally, for us, our three things are engagement, communication, which is key to any relationship, and the biggest one police departments get in trouble with, transparency. Be transparent. When you try to hide things, like there's certain times in investigations, and we have incidents here, we can't provide comment. But many times you can tell them the majority of the facts. And that's what they want to hear. They want truth. That's how you build relationships. Like when I see chiefs get in trouble for the most minute, and when they can be transparent, it goes a long way. Like I talked about earlier, people want to be vested. And I love what the panelists were saying earlier. I don't know how many times I've got a call when I've called people. I'm like, Deputy Chief, you called me? I'm like, yes. Yeah, I'll come to your house. You want to have a cup of coffee? Like, that's what it's about. And those little steps, the days of patrolling and being stagnant and distant, I wasn't one of them. I can only speak for myself. I was the patrolman that pulled over when I saw someone get out of my cruiser and talk to them in their front lawn. Hey, you want to meet my canine Icarus? I take the dog out. You work for them. In this environment I'm in, I work for the students in Poshy. But any police officer or anybody who works in public, you work for the public. It's not the other way around. And you can have your cake and eat it too. And it comes down to respect. And I honestly believe in my heart that the majority of Americans love law enforcement, that some of these destitute neighborhoods, they're screaming for more police. So I like to silence I'm a man of faith, and I believe we're going to come out of this. But it takes leadership to come out of this. It needs leaders to have courage, like Chief Smith and other leaders, to say, yeah, that's not what's going on. We know we can get better. If you show me a profession that I think of any profession where I think law enforcement does platoon themselves very well and weeds out the bad seeds, but we're not perfect. And that's why Chief mentioned earlier, hiring the right people, promoting the right individuals. I'm just keeping the seat warm. There's going to be another deputy chief. There's going to be another Chief Smith. And you hope that you build through professional leadership. And Chief, I'm also a graduate of Northwestern Class 471. You build your leaders up. And that's my responsibility to find those good people, hire the people that are empathetic. Listen, it's okay to be, there's times you got to be strong, and there's many times you have to be empathetic and have a heart. It's very important. And that's the direction we're going. And I agree earlier with the panelists. If you're not listening to the public, I don't even care in the previous, you're getting the message wrong, and you shouldn't be in those leadership positions.
Yeah, thank you. One of the really cool themes that I'm hearing from all of you is the priority on the engagement, but the value of making those at personal connections so that you know that you're authentically connecting and you're being transparent, you're building that respect. Dave, I kind of think that you're in a little bit of a unique position as well, because you're providing leadership on a campus of young adults, right? And so the role modeling that you're doing as a department is going to be guiding those students and others into their careers and their professions and their family lives. So what you're really espousing, I think, is a really valuable thing. So thank you. You know, let's start with you on the third question to Deputy Chief Drezek. Can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using to understand expectations and priorities on police services at KU?
Absolutely. You know, we talk about, and we all use it, technology. We use our social media. In my environment, that's all they have. Twitter, Instagram. You go into a meeting, you know, when I go to a parent orientation, which I had this morning, and students, we're very excited because now we're getting people back to the university. We're getting back to the norms. And for us, it is about engagement. We have weekly meetings, monthly meetings with the stakeholders. We have a great leadership team with, as I talked about earlier, we have a president, a cabinet, board of trustees. And like I told you, when we're fully functional, we triple the area. You know, we have about 10,000 people, and 8 to 10,000 on any given day. With our groups, we do listen to everybody. And whether if Chief Dillon handles it or he tell you, Dave, you got to go bring this group in, talk to them. They know they can reach out to me. My door is always open. They'll make an appointment with the clerk, and I have people in and out of my office all the time. And each and every one we follow up on. And that's another thing. I'll follow up with a simple call. It seems even a hand note, an email. Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to listen to your problem. It goes a million miles, you know, and it's a simple touch like that. Because again, I work for the patch behind me, and I represent the university and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you know, so, and I work for them, and we all do. For us, we talked earlier about listening to your stakeholders. You have to. And there's sometimes you're going to hear some stuff you don't want to hear. I've been sent to meetings where I just sat there and I listened. You know, sometimes the truths are in the middle. You'll get one side, two sides, and the truth's in the middle. But we all know stories grow through the grapevine. And that's why transparency comes in. When the chief's there talking about it, he's putting like I represent Chief Dillon. He just turns to his right and Deputy Chief Drezek's there. You know, when my time comes, my time will come. But I represent him. So I take that with pride. And it's all about respecting the stakeholders. And for us, it's vital, and it's working well here. Like I said earlier, we had that protest, and that was in the heat of it. Literally, it was a proud moment for the university community, the area community. It was an experience, and it was nice to see. And that was from collaborating with each other.
That's great. When you had mentioned the use of technology, what technology do you find to be most successful for you to check in with your residents or to help you track your performance? Is there anyone that would come to mind?
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, but we also have an SMS system we use at the university to get messages out to our students. And you have to remember, in campus law enforcement, we have the Clery Act. So we are very transparent. We have any type of crime, we do timely warnings. If it's a major incident, everybody's being notified instantly. So we have standards. The Jean Clery Act, which was enacted from an incident that happened many years ago at Lehigh, you know, and as a father of 2 daughters, I take it serious. When I do orientations, the number one question is, are my children going to be safe here? You know, not only do we have plate readers on every exit and cameras on the, I have 16 sworn officers. Yeah, the answer is yes. The chief of police's daughter comes to this great university. Cabinet members. So yeah, it's important.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Chief Smith, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using for understanding resident expectations and priorities?
Well, one of the things I try to do is go outside the box. I listen to the youth, and like Deputy Chief said, you know, listening to the children that's on the different campuses and everything to see what their perception and what they're listening to and what they're doing. So what I did is actually went out to the couple of local radio stations and started a show on there called the Chief's Corner. And with the Chief's Corner, I bring in people from all walks of life. Normally I highlight certain days where I have a juvenile or a child to come on there and ask questions about law enforcement, talk about some of the issues that's going on in the school system. And I'm just big on education. Education is a tool. It opens doors. You know, it's not everything, but it makes a person more disciplined when they're talking about education. And the opportunities, me coming from a small town that I had, just going out and seeking more knowledge, it just has really helped me. So one thing with the Chief's Corner is just talk about day-to-day issues. We highlight school teachers. I bring school teachers on to just talk about the issues. We try to get more information out there, even talk about different books that we're reading. There's one in particular book that we're reading currently now is called The End of Policing. And I think everybody in law enforcement needs to read this book. This book is very informative, talking about that warrior mentality that we had in the 1960s when the Civil Rights Act that was actually going on, and that military style. We are a paramilitary organization, but we still act like we're the military. And it's good in information. Some of it kind of mess with your mind a little bit, make you ticked off a little bit, but it's truth. And truth is not always going to make you feel good. But we bring on different authors, different people who's in the community, musicians, because we're known for the blues here in the Delta. And we just have a good time and letting people see another side of law enforcement and bringing officers on there. And even with my officers, bringing those officers in and they're asking questions and I'm asking them questions as well. But it shows a different side, and we have to be more creative in our approach when we come to different individuals.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the music and the value that performing arts brings to the quality of a community. You know, as a city manager, it adds so much quality to the fabric of a community. And so I'm really hearing you there, Chief, on the value that brings. Yeah.
Well, that's a universal language, music. What better way? You know, music, everyone loves it. It has no racial barrier. It's just a better fit. You know, that's one of the better fits. Music brings people together and it makes people feel good and they forget everything. So it makes you feel like a kid again. So we have to start thinking outside the box on some of the things that how we approach our communities.
I think the blues sound better in the Delta, though.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Kaitlyn, can you share with us some of the tools and methods that you're using in Sarasota County for helping to understand and measure community resident impacts or expectations?
Sure. One of the things that Sheriff Hoffman tasked his command staff with in the last 6 months since he's been elected, he's asked all of us to serve on some sort of a community board, council, nonprofit, whatever it is that we are passionate about. He has tasked each member of his command staff to serve in a capacity representing the sheriff's office, but in an effort to stay connected to that group of stakeholders. So that's one kind of tactic he uses. We also have designated units that focus on quality of life issues that are going out and talking to residents about issues like homelessness. We have a designated homeless outreach team. We have a navigator team. Now this is kind of a new approach. It's kind of fun. We have navigators who help our inmates reintegrate back into society. They're talking to employers and they're saying, hey, what qualifications, what skill sets are you looking for? How can we help these people become productive members of society once again in Sarasota County? So our HOT team, our navigators, these are kind of our conduits to the community who are really talking with people every day about quality of life issues and solving real social issues in the community. So that's a good pulse check. That kind of lets us know where we are in the community. But overall, I mean, in terms of technology, of course, we're utilizing social media as a tool. We have a mobile app that we're using, and we're also implementing a new crime reporting tool on our website. You kind of find with millennials, they'd much rather, kind of get on the computer than even get on the phone with you, right? So we're trying to elevate our technology to allow more people to interface with us electronically, if that's the way that they want to. It's so interesting. I manage our agency's social media channels. And it's so wild. And it's so wild when I tell these deputies, we're receiving crime tips and reports on Facebook. People are more comfortable sending me a message on Facebook than they are getting on the phone. So we have to keep that connection to the community. We have to keep that line of connection because we're getting good intel. And when people have a concern, again, they're messaging me at 5 o'clock on a Saturday night saying, I was just pulled over and the deputy was a jerk. Well, by 6 o'clock, I have a watch commander picking up the phone, talking to that resident and finding out, if we did something wrong. So it's that real-time policing. And what we've kind of adopted in addition to community policing is rightful policing. And again, it seems simple, but it's going back to the basics, just like the chief said earlier. When you initiate that traffic stop, could you cite that driver for maybe 3 or 4, different citations? You probably could, but just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And that's being rightful in your approach. That's doing law enforcement the right way. So we implement rightful policing in our new employee orientation, in our leadership academies. We've got a good, strong culture, and I think the community feels that and they reciprocate that.
Kaitlyn, are you using any tools in your strategic plans at all for kind of tracking your performance? And I'm also kind of intrigued about how about internally? Are you using any? There's such a dynamic environment right now in the whole law enforcement world. I'm hearing from a lot of police chiefs where there's just a lot of turnover just because of some of the professional challenges and community impacts and those kinds of things. What are you experiencing in the county as it relates to turnover in your troops? It just strikes me that you're doing so many positive engagement kinds of things and building a community that that may not be something that you're experiencing.
Sheriff Hoffman often says he thinks it's a great time to go into the law enforcement field. And the reason is we're not just out there being warriors in our community. Going back to the language from the 21st Century Policing Report, we are guardians. We are helping people find homes. We are helping people navigate their mental health issues and challenges. We're feeding children. We're doing really, really cool stuff. It's a really cool time to be in law enforcement. Right now, currently in our law enforcement division, we have 1 vacancy. We have more than 1,000 employees. We're moving full steam ahead. We've got competitive salaries, we've got good benefits, and we've had to stay in front of that because we do realize nationally it's a tough profession. But I think there are good people out there that are born and bred in public service, and they grow up, and when they're 10 years old and they meet that deputy who's their SRO, they know they want to be a cop, and that doesn't change. It's in their blood. Yeah,
that's great. That's a good perspective. And congratulations. 1 vacancy says a lot for the department, I think, for all the valuable things that you're doing and the different techniques that you're using. You've introduced several kind of just innovative, really kind of cool approaches that I haven't heard necessarily from some of these earlier panel conversations. So thank you for that. Do either of you have any comments or questions for each other, or anything else that you'd like to add before we kind of wrap this up?
Well, I have one thing, Mr. Fulton, is that we're going through some difficult times, and we just have to understand that we just have to work together. The bottom line is just getting an understanding with each other, and just the bottom line is just be truthful. We're going through some difficult times. Like I said in the beginning, no one wants to be the police anymore. We have to educate our children that this is a great profession. This is a profession. It's just not just a job, it's a calling. It's a call of being a servant to the Most High, the God that we serve. And we have to put him first. And we just have to do what we need to do and make sure that we're understanding each other's language. And it's not talking English. It's just understanding each other's language, because there's a lot of misconceptions about policing. There's a lot of bad things that's going on in our community. We're losing children daily. You're looking at a small town of Helena-West, Helena, Arkansas. The last 2 years, we've lost 24 people to homicides for this little small town. And a lot of these children and young men and young women grew up together. They grew up in this small town. But with all the churches that we have on each corner, all the school systems that we have, and then understanding that these parents need to not only be parents, but do have a sense of proper parenting, knowing how to parent. And we have to go back to that old African proverbs, it takes a village to raise a child. And we're in this together. And we have to be able to understand each other's language, and knowing that with all the things that we go through and all these policies and all these changes, that at some point we're going to have to come together to have a better quality of life.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that perspective very much.
Sir.
You know, one of the things that I really have been impressed about with this conversation today is the focus on transparency and engagement, and the truthfulness, because that all builds, and it's all related. If you can build up that trust quotient in your community, people's general satisfaction in their quality of life is going to be higher as well. And so I think there is a direct relationship to paying attention to the challenges in law enforcement and making sure that you've got the right environment for making sure that you can actually demonstrate truth, equity, all of the things that all of you have talked about. But you're all also maintaining those personal connections to people on an individual level, and introducing creativity. Kaitlyn, the creative ways that you have helped to make sure that your community is engaged. I mean, you're directly supporting what we found in our National Police Services Survey, the value of connecting residents with your law enforcement personnel to solve the problems of the community. Really intrigued and impressed by the SURE group, as well as your HOT approach. Really very cool stuff. So thank you for that. All of you clearly have demonstrated the value of engagement in your communities, and are approaching it in different ways, but still true to the word of the universal need to engage, particularly in these challenging times. Just very, very good conversation. So what I'm going to do now, and just kind of wrapping this up, I will send you information that'll give you information with each other, so you can connect with each other if you like. I do these conversations every week, and so if you know of anybody that's interested or would be good at having this panel conversation and sharing their perspectives, I would welcome you to share their names with me. We want to make sure we're providing value to the law enforcement profession and communities, leaders in local government. And so I appreciate any help that you can provide. I'm certainly going to be looking and connecting with you to look for your feedback on what we can do differently to improve these panel conversations. You'll start seeing, probably within a week, the recordings of your highlight segments showing up on LinkedIn, and really ask you to share those on your LinkedIn networks as well, so that others can benefit from your perspectives and learn what's working for you, and maybe introduce them into their own particular communities. I just want to thank all of you for participating. These are always great conversations. I love this because I get to meet new people every week, great leaders in the local government profession. And even though you might be in different sized jurisdictions, the importance of engagement and the services that you deliver to people who are going to be, they're just trying to have a high quality of life and protect their kids and have a meaningful life. And the role that we all play in local government is such an important and critical role. And so thank you for being part of that and for sharing your perspectives today. I'll be catching up with you soon, but I really appreciate the time that you spent.
Thank you, sir. Thank everyone on the panel.
Thank you, Matt. And Chief, thank you for your service and for your insight.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you later.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.